So Bill had agreed to do this presentation about China some time ago, before we were um, caught by the coronavirus and stopped having our Monday morning get-togethers. As a result, it's taken us a little while to get together, but Bill has put some of this together for us now. So I wonder if you could describe a little bit about your China experience and launch into your presentation, Bill.
Okay. Basically, in October, Janet and I had a time to go to China, and we spent about 3 weeks in mainland China and some time in Japan and Hong Kong. And what I what I saw during that trip versus what I thought I knew about China was such a disconnect that I came back and realized that for most of us, we are woefully uninformed and often misinformed on what's happening in China and what's going on. I set to work to put together a presentation that I could do to groups like this that will hopefully give you a lot more insight on why China is doing some of the things it's doing and how they look at things. Because if you're going to compete with somebody and you don't understand who they are, you are already a long way behind in the race. So this is my attempt to get us all to have a higher level of understanding and hopefully motivate people to explore further on their own. So with that, Reed, let's see here. I'll start the presentation.
Yep, that should work. We practiced it, so we'll see if practice makes perfect.
Yeah, right.
Looks like it's coming up.
Okay.
We now see your screen, and there's the presentation. Perfect.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is philosophy and history, communism in the country, and today and tomorrow. This is about a 35 to 40 some minute presentation, and I'll go through it fairly quickly. Philosophy and history. China is a very old culture. It goes back almost, 4,000 years, basically. The beginning of Taoism was one of the early philosophies. Laozi in 400 kind of codified that, but that was after 2,100 years of it already existing. Its focus is on compassion, frugality, and humility. Confucius, around the same time, 500 BCE, came up with an emphasis on family and social harmony. And these are the basic philosophies that underlie much of the Chinese culture. They also had a pantheon of gods, very similar to what the Greeks and Romans have. So you've got a god of heaven and earth and water and trees and things like that. And they, much like the Greeks, they pay them respect, but it's not like you really go out and worry a lot about it. At the same time, in Greece, Socrates was inventing the philosophy there of choice motivated by the desire for happiness. And Plato made the point that soul is the driving force behind the body and mind. So if you look at these philosophies in 400 BC, they're not really different by any great degree. You can see, if you squint real hard, some commonalities. Now, what did change in Europe? The Protestant religion. And this put an emphasis on the individual. And before the Protestant religion, England had the Magna Carta, which gave people rights, mainly the royalty. And then later with the United States, we had the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. It is important to understand that there are no comparable documents in China on this kind of thought or philosophy. So in China, you start with the individual and responsibility. And that requirement goes up. So the individual is responsible for their parents, family, community, state, and to the party. In the United States, we start with rights, and the individual rights are paramount. And these are the two lenses that we have to look at both countries with. If you look through the responsibility lens, you see China in one way. If you put on our rights lens, then it's a very confusing place, and we don't understand it. So it's important to keep in mind these distinctions. The other concept is the mandate of heaven. This goes all the way back to the first emperors. And basically, if the people were living a good life, there wasn't famine, there wasn't disease, then they conceded that the ruling body, the mandate of heaven, and they supported it. If they had a plague, or if they were invaded and defeated, then the emperor lost the mandate of heaven. And we've seen just a classic example in the last several months of the coronavirus was a mandate of heaven question for China. This was an existential threat to the party and the government. And that's why they had jumped all over it with a fairly ruthless crackdown, and they had to solve that problem. And I would say that they did. And they're going to take credit that they now have confirmed their mandate of heaven. Now, let me give you several thousand years of history. The first dynasty was somewhere around 2000 BCE. For the next 4,000 years, up till the 1911 Qing dynasty, if you saw the movie The Last Emperor, that's what that was about. During those 4,000 years, China had arguably one of the most advanced cultures and civilizations in the world. And so this is the heritage that they think back to. However, in 1839, they had 110 years of humiliation by colonial powers, and I'll go into a little more detail about that. Then 27 years of Mao, which wasn't real great either. So the current China has only existed in its current form for the last 44 years. So you have to put that in the perspective of what have they accomplished in those 44 years. And just to go through the 110 years of humiliation, the first one was the defeat of the first Opium War. And if you're not familiar with that, England had India, and they were growing a lot of opium in India, and they didn't have any market for it, and they didn't want to sell it in England. And they knew China had a lot of silver, and that's what they really wanted. And so they came to China and says, you're going to buy our opium and pay us in silver. And China wasn't real excited about that. And they went to war. And so basically the United Kingdom was the world's largest drug dealer at the time and forced China to buy opium from it. Then the whole series from unequal treaties to a rebellion to the Second Opium War, the French then decided, hey, this is a pretty good country. They beat up on China and took Vietnam. Then there's the first Sino-Japanese War, which Japan won. The Boxer uprising, and the Boxers got their name because these were guys using martial arts to fight an 8-nation alliance, which was France, Germany, Britain, and I think even the United States was in there, and a bunch of other countries who were having guns. And that is not a good, you don't go to you don't take a knife to a gunfight. And that's about what they did. And they lost terribly. Then the British took Tibet, and Japan put demands on them, and in 31 invaded Manchuria and took over it. And the battle went on until 1945, when finally the Japanese were defeated. So this is a history that is very deeply ingrained in China as far as the total humiliations. They were beaten up and things were taken from them for that period of time. Well, then they had Mao, and that wasn't any better. So his great leap forward in 58 to 62, when he collectivized the farms, led to extensive famine. And deaths are estimated to be between 18 and 56 million people died during that 4-year period of time. He was criticized and stepped back for a few years, but came on again in 66 with the Cultural Revolution. This time, another 10 to 20 million people were killed, and the main focus was on intellectuals. So here you've wiped out the professors and teachers and many of the doctors and everything. So Deng Xiaoping takes over in 1976, and he took over a country that had been literally beaten up for 150 some years. So this is the story from there. So part of that is communism, and I want to go over that a little bit. As you probably know, the ideology of communism is to create a classless society, and it's based on the philosophy of Marx up through Mao, Deng, and Xi. Now, Marx's original documents basically talk about the stages go from ancient to slavery, feudal, capitalism, socialism, and communism. And China's realized that one of the failures of the Soviet Union is they tried to go straight from feudal to communist and never went through the capitalist or socialist periods. And China's not going to make that mistake. They've also felt that they have really gone through the class struggle thing already, and they have abandoned, you don't hear them talk about class struggle like the Soviet Union talked about. This is a totally different form of communism, and they're focused on the advancement of productive forces, because one of the things that Marx said was if you can improve the material well-being of the people, then issues like freedom and things like that play far less of a role. And so they're focused on the modes of production, and they accept and understand the economic laws of history. And they see science and technology as the primary driving force to improve the well-being of their country and their people. They also believe that the private economy complements the socialist economy. Again, a very huge difference from Russia. And that they're going to allow a few to prosper to ensure that everyone prospers. Jack Ma is a multi-billionaire over there, and he's also a member of the Communist Party. So people like him could not have existed in Russia or Soviet Union, and they are welcomed in China. And they feel that Marxism, like any science, has to change with the times and circumstances. So they have a very pragmatic ideology that needs to be dynamic. When they fault the Soviet Union that it had a very rigid ideology that just didn't adjust to the times. But the bottom line is China will never be humiliated again. Now, the Communist Party itself, out of a population of 1.4 billion, 91 million are members. That's 7 out of 100. So very few are members of the actual Communist Party. To be a member, you must be at least 18, Chinese national. They invite the top high school and college students to join, 23% of women. They then go through a rigorous course of study and testing on the history of communism and the economics and the general ideology that is developed in China. Then 3 generations of your ancestors are reviewed, and if any of them are not really, if any of them have criticized communism, you're not going to get in. You then have to have recommendations, 2 party members, approval of your local 1-year probational oath of allegiance, and then you have yearly tests and dues. So the key point here is they're taking the best of the best. They're training them in a consistent ideology. And those folks know as long as they support the party, they've got a pretty good deal. Now, the quality of people that they're bringing in is very similar to what we used to bring into our foreign service. So these are not hacks or flakes and things like that, that like in the Soviet Union. Now, the country, guess what? China and the United States are almost exactly the same size. However, all of the population, or 90 some percent of it, is concentrated into the eastern part of China. If you took the entire population of the United States, put them east of the Mississippi, and multiplied them by 4, you would have what the density of China is. They've got a bunch of languages. Mandarin is the main one. Cantonese is spoken in Hong Kong. Lots of different religions, with the traditional religions of Confucianism and Taoism predominant among the population. Over in the West, you have the Uyghurs, and then you have Buddhism down in the Tibetan area. In terms of cities, Chongqing is the largest in the world, 30 million people. Shanghai at 24 million. Beijing at 21 million. New York is 8 million. So you can see orders of magnitude of city size. Now, let's look at today and tomorrow. This was Shanghai 50 years ago. This was at the end of Mao's time. And as I said, in the last 44 years, China's changed. So take a look at what Shanghai was some 50 years ago. And this is what Shanghai is today. This is along the Bund, which is the financial district. And every night, about several 100,000 people show up to watch the lights and gather and talk, kids play, and things like that. And this is the city that they've put together. So, college graduates in China, 8 million will graduate this year. 4 million will graduate in the United States, of which only 2 million of those are bachelor's degrees. 1 million's associates, 1 million graduate and PhDs. So they're cranking out twice as many college graduates as we are. In engineering, they graduate, or in the School of Engineering, they have 600,000 students to our 70,000 students, of which our 15,000 are international students and our 70,000. So they have approximately 10 times the amount of engineers being educated as we do. And their schools of engineering now are equal to ours, mainly because they did their PhDs at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and all the rest of them. Students abroad, we have 12,000 Americans studying in China. China has 370,000 Chinese studying in the United States. So if you want to know your enemy, they know us a heck of a lot better than we know them. This is an interesting one when I ran across it, is the annual population change. And you can see here where they were decimated during the famine. Then they had the one-child policy, and it became constitutional, and then they got rid of it. But what has happened is that they have improved their well-being. They've moved over 600 million people out of poverty. And so that when people make more money, they have fewer kids. So now they're on the part of the curve where they're actually going to be declining in population. They've also had a Sputnik moment. If you remember, as I do, Kennedy's speech that when the little Sputnik satellite running around the world, beep, beep, beeping, and Kennedy came on and said, within this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. And we did. Well, China's had a Sputnik moment as well. And that was when Google beat the Asian Go master with artificial intelligence. And if you're not familiar with Go, it's an order of magnitude more complex than chess. And China takes and Asia takes great pride on being very good at it. So to get beaten by an American technology company was huge. After that, Xi came out and said, in artificial intelligence, they'll make major breakthroughs by 2025 and have world leadership by 2030. They're on track to do that. 5G, all major cities covered by 2023, world leadership by 2025. They already have world leadership with Huawei. The United States does not have a single company in that market industry. The other companies are in Scandinavia. Blockchain, they're going to seize the opportunity. Janet, could you give me a lozenge, please? And they plan to end poverty this year. There's about 16 million people still in poverty in China. They know who they are. They have programs designed that will bring them out of poverty. Excuse me for just a minute here. I'm not used to talking. The Belton Road project is the largest infrastructure investment in history. They currently have 1,700 projects going on in 68 countries. They are going to complete it by 2048-9, which is the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. And right now, they already have a daily freight train service between China and Europe. It's 7,500 miles, 17 days, cheaper than air, faster than ships. This is the Belton Road Initiative and where they are going with rail lines, highways. They're building seaports, air terminals all over the world in the developing countries. These are the countries that are involved in the Belton Road Initiative. And you notice that South America is included in them. One of the big projects that they've got going on that represents what they're doing is Xi'an. It's about 80 miles south of Beijing. They're going to be moving much of the China government down to this place. It's a $91 billion project for infrastructure. It will be completed in 2022. The project itself will be in 2030. So in less than 10 years, they are going to turn farmland into a city the equivalent of Chicago. They'll have 4 high-speed trains connecting it, 20 minutes to Beijing. It'll have a population of 2.5 million, GDP close to 300 billion. 80% of its industry will be cutting-edge technology, self-driving cars regulated by AI, and 100% clean power. Now, since this can't do audio, I'm going to do a voiceover. So I should sound like a NBC person or CBS person. So if you bear with me, I'll try to stay in sync with what's going on here. Everywhere she goes, Oh Young Hao is followed. What she buys, how she behaves is tracked and scored to show how responsible and trustworthy she is. It's called a social credit system, and one version now being tested. A person's reputation are scored on a scale of 350 to 950. And Oh Young, with a good score of 752, is okay with it, and most people are. It's a mechanism pushes you to become a better citizen. It is big data meets big brother, expanding how the government monitors and understands and all that controls its 1.4 billion citizens. Thanks to advances in artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and a web of more than 200 million surveillance cameras, are people bothered by privacy concerns? We think a lot of camera keep the safety. It's really good. We can accept it. Companies are experimenting with the algorithm to help the government create the new national social credit system. The government also has pilot programs. In one, people are required to do unpaid work to get benefits. Scores are docked for things like littering, messy yard, gossip, jaywalking. Video of offenders shown on the local news, and information collectors like Joe Lee are paid to report on their neighbors. Per quota, 10 entries a month. Like the man who carried a drunk person home. A good deed, she said. Good social credit scores get rewarded with perks, like cheap loans and travel deals. But a bad score is public shame and worse. Feng Lijung lost a court case, now on a blacklist. I can't buy airplane tickets or train tickets. And the list goes on. Below, social credit makes it hard to get loans for kids into top schools. The social credit system will go live next year. You are willing to criticize it and risk getting a bad score and the losses that go with it. Okay, you hear talk of decoupling. And this is, we seem to be racing toward that, where the United States wants to insulate itself from China, and China is already well on its way to insulating itself from the United States. What we have in this, and you can't see it probably very well, but search, shopping, payment, videos, music, messaging, social media, news aggregators, maps, local services, bike sharing, dating, gaming, cloud, are below the line all the companies that the US has doing it, and above the line are all the companies China has doing it. And so you see that they've got somebody offsetting every one of our companies. Now, the thing you have to appreciate, we're a country of 350 million consumers. They're a country of 1.4 billion consumers. And so when it comes to things like big data and stuff like that, they've got a massive advantage. They're racing ahead with 5G. They will have that in the next 2 years. As I said, China holds over 3,400 patents compared to about 1,400 by the United States. Also in the use of internet, China, just by the masses of people, the size of the circle represent number of people using it, and cash and credit cards. China has nearly 80% of their transactions now done on without cash and credit cards. They are using Apple Pay is the kind of thing that everybody uses. Taxi drivers, street vendors, everybody. The U.S. has a fleet of 300 electric buses. China has 421,000. And they clearly lead the world in this area. In approximately 3 years' time, China uses more concrete, makes and uses more concrete than the U.S. did in the entire 20th century. When it comes to crude steel production, China makes roughly half the world's supply and more than 10 times what the United States produces. In electric power, China makes 6 trillion kilowatts compared to the United States 4 trillion kilowatts. And in tons of CO2, this is where we claim that, well, China is the major polluter because they do something like 9,000 tons of CO2 and the United States only does about 5. Well, when you put that per person, China's at 8 and we're at 16. So we're at per person twice as dirty, but as a country, we're half as dirty because they have 4 times the amount of people. So it's all in which number you want to use. However, they're building 30 nuclear reactors. These are Generation 4 nuclear reactors. Generation 4 basically solves the problems of pollution and safety and everything else. All of our nuclear reactors are Generation 2, which have all those problems, and we have no nuclear reactors under construction. They are also making 10 major dams, similar to the Three Gorges, and they're world leader in solar power. So if you put all this together, and this is somewhat complex, but it really provides, I think, a great summary of where they're at and why we have to think carefully and how we go about a trade war with them. For starters, they have the Great Firewall. Their country is totally capable of insulating itself from the rest of the world. This is the first line of defense in cyber war. And much like the Great Wall, it is built to keep others out. We have no comparable thing to this. They are focusing on blockchain technology, which can also be used for cryptocurrency, but blockchain is able to either provide total transparency or total secrecy. And as they apply it to government contracts, they are for the first time going to be able to see where every one of their dollars or yuan go. And this is going to be a huge tool in eliminating corruption. Cryptocurrency will be a new world sovereign currency. You hear Bitcoin and other things. None of those are backed by a government. China is going to have the first sovereign currency. And this threatens to replace the dollar, or at least complement the dollar, in terms of being a national or international currency. The social credit system that I showed you, they can monetize good behavior and penalize bad. People go out and do volunteer work and things, you get social credits. You gossip or jaywalk or whatever, and you get penalized. It's a very powerful new tool to regulate social actions. Mobile payments, I said, will eliminate paper currency. Microcredit, they can give you a $100 loan in about 10 minutes that analyzes over 5,000 different things about you that determines whether you're lendable or not. Our banks use less than 10. They have AI and big data that basically, one of the strengths of the capitalist system is that dollars generate market signals, but these now they can replace with big data. Decoupling, as I showed you, the companies they've got that are comparable to US is beginning to insulate them from sanctions in a trade war. With facial recognition, they've got total tracking. And with 5G as a backbone, they've got between 10 and 100 times the speed and power of the current internet. So all of these are yin and yang, the good and the bad. And one of the other theories of yin and yang is that within every strength, there's a weakness. Within every weakness, there is a strength. And so these two things balance out. Under China, they have absolute party supremacy. As long as you recognize that, you've got no problem. If you don't recognize that, you've got lots of problems. They are becoming a world leader in science and technology. They will never again be humiliated. So when we start going up against them, like in the South China Sea and things, we're hitting directly at this humiliation thing. So we shouldn't be surprised at them overreacting on a lot of that. And they're trying to reclaim their historical sphere of influence, which they feel was stolen from them during the 110 years of humiliation. They got big problems. Pollution. As I said, they are the top polluter as a nation, not as a per capita. They don't have enough water, particularly in the east. So that's going to be a big one. Their healthcare system pretty well stinks, and it's amazing they got on top of this coronavirus thing because their doctors are poorly trained, their facilities are not very good, and I can bet that that's going to be an area over the next 10 years they dramatically change. Energy security is important, food security. Social unrest scares the daylights out of them. National security, they want to be in a position that nobody can push them around. Material well-being, they want to have people able to say, my life is better this year than it was last year. And if they do that, they'll maintain the mandate of heaven. Whew. So that's it. And let me get out of this and open it up if you
catch your breath and get a drink of water. You got through there pretty well. Thank you very much.
Bill, that was incredible. Just incredible. I learned so much. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
That was absolutely fascinating, Bill. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What is the best school in the United States to learn Chinese?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
What is the best Chinese language school in the United States of America?
Oh boy, I can't really think of any. And the problem with learning Chinese is it's a tonal language. And by the age of 5, you have really lost the ability to distinguish the tonality in it. So, and there's 5,000 characters in the in their language. So it's almost impossible for somebody, unless they're an exceptional linguist, to pick up Chinese.
This was really, really well done. Thank you so much, Bill. That opened my eyes, and I appreciate your expertise and look forward to studying this more.
Okay.
Great. I have a question, Bill, about the concept of mandate of heaven.
Yes.
I wonder, it seems like it's some sort of a unifying principle, the idea that somebody gains control and then has the right to proceed as long as they act justly or
right
with the good of the whole in mind. And so I don't know if we have a similar kind of a counter measure here. I guess could you think about our opposite, if you will, in those triangles that you started us off with?
Wow, that's a great question, and I'd say our touchstones are Constitution and Bill of Rights that we go back to.
So that idea probably of independent initiative and that idea of freedom, which we're hearing a lot about right now because people are saying that their freedoms are being compromised, might be sort of the opposite view or the challenge that we have. Just like having a mandate of heaven might let you run roughshod over people, a focus on freedom might make it impossible to unify. We might even be feeling that way right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point, that the average Chinese person is just aghast at particularly what's going on in Hong Kong. I mean, I showed you what a Sunday night was in Shanghai with the lights in the city and the boats and the families out. We spent the next Sunday night in Hong Kong, where the riot police were out in full gear, the water cannon and demonstrators. And you say, would I rather be in Hong Kong or Shanghai? And for all Chinese, they'd say, well, Shanghai, Hong Kong looks like a terrible place there. And then they look at the United States and, we kill people. There aren't any guns and there isn't any hunting in China. So, and in fact, there was a story of a woman that lost her wallet in Tiananmen Square. And she went back a couple hours later and they directed her to Lost and Found. and her wallet was there with everything in it. And I hear that story, and the month before we'd been in Times Square, and some guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, I wouldn't carry my phone in the back pocket like that because you're going to lose it. So if somebody dropped a wallet in Times Square and came back 3 hours later, do you think it would be a lost and found? Probably not. So, but in Tiananmen Square, you'd be nuts if you picked it up and tried to steal it because, there's 20 cameras on a post and they've got facial recognition and you go through an ID check to get in there. So they know everybody that's in there and they know where you are. So you'd not be long before you had a knock on the door.
God.
Yes, it's very it's amazing to me to think about how obviously the idea that every strength has a weakness and every weakness has a strength. It's important for us in some sense to recognize not only their weaknesses, but ours as well in this situation.
Well, and that's why I really hope people study more about China, because they have got some strengths and weaknesses, and the more we learned about them, the better. The one other thing, a quote that struck me, somebody was asking a Chinese gal, a young one, that is she concerned about privacy and all this surveillance? And her response was, if I'm not committing a crime, why do I care? And that really resonated with me. Does our thing of privacy protect the criminals more than the other people? And I don't think there's a clear answer. We have a lot of answers based on our cultural history and biases, but when you sit down and really look at the pros and cons, like on Manitou Beach, I'd love to have traffic cameras down there and the people that speed get a ticket. But raise that to the council and, it'd be violating their privacy. Instead, they're going to put a speed bump in, and then I have to go over the speed bump. It's like we penalize everybody.
But then you also have the story, the person that was quoted in the NBC News story who, for whatever reason, got on a blacklist, and that's it. That's all she wrote. No more plane tickets for you.
Exactly. And I'm not sure it's all that bad.
Really made me think about jaywalking.
Well, and what's funny is they've got these huge TV screens on each corner. And if somebody jaywalks, the camera knows it and immediately puts up on the screen their picture and calls out their name. And in China, face is very important. And being embarrassed is the last thing they want. So they have cut down jaywalking tremendously.
That's what you need is a picture on Manitou Beach, just shining back on.
Well, it was so startling in a way to look at where the strong future that they have developed for themselves and how they have incorporated this thinking about what communism was and how they want to change that, and then just that all of the roads and all of the, I don't know, it's just quite mind-boggling. I mean, some of this I've heard before, but always in bits and pieces, and certainly never seeing, this kind of a presentation. It was really eye-opening and a bit frightening, especially the way the talk comes from Washington toward China, and it's really appreciated. It's a very thoughtful, eye-opening presentation.
Well, thank you very much for that. And one of the things that has struck me the most is that they have the consistency of leadership. So she is going to be in power for another 10 years or so. You've got 90 million party members that all are consistently trained. So
Right.
you don't have somebody going one direction and somebody going the
Yeah.
other direction.
Yeah.
Those people are embedded in every government organization in every country, in every company. So she decides he wants to do something on Monday, and on Tuesday, there are 90 million people out with that message.
Wow.
Now, we compare that to us, where we totally throw everything up in the air every 4 years. And one president spends his whole time annihilating what the other guy did. And these long-term problems or projects like energy and things like that, you can't do that and make any progress. So I think we've got some fundamental questions to ask about how do we go about this? Because this, and we're living on the fact, well, the Soviet Union, went bankrupt, and they did, but this is a different kind of communism, and it's we got to appreciate that.
That's the point, is to appreciate what, is obviously so well organized and so well thought through, and on such a big scale.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and the balance of that, I look at some of the strengths, some of the things that we've been able to create with innovation and free thinking, and the kind of ability that we've seen with our technology giants. If we could put some of that in concert with a consistent federal policy, you have something pretty dangerous or positive to present to the world.
Yeah, and the last time we did that, I would argue, was World War II, when the country really came together and got focused on a common enemy, and we demonstrated just amazing capability. But I think we've sat on our laurels for a long time, and that to me, that generation was the greatest generation in the world, and I feel very grateful that I grew up as a child with those people as role models of how a community can come together and what they can do. And I sense that we've lost that over the years, but we still have the same attitude of how great we are and things like that. And we're not continuing to earn that right.
Hey, Bill, I want to ask a question about 5G, because there's, concerns in this country from some people about the utilization of 5G. What's your feeling?
Well, there's no peer-reviewed medical studies that represent any problem with it from that aspect. It is 10 to 100 times more powerful. If you don't have 5G, you'll never get on the Internet of Things, which is the next big revolution that's coming. And if you're not there, then you're just behind in technology. And so it's going to enable so many things, virtual reality and artificial intelligence and all these other things that depend on it. And that one slide I showed, the main point there was they are not only leading in 5G, but they're integrating all these other technologies into it. And if we don't have that as a backbone, we don't even have a place to go. So, and that's a classic example of they made a decision. We're going this way, and nobody argues with it. And we're going to spend several years arguing about it. And they are going to dominate the world in that period of time in 5G technology.
And in other things also.
Yeah, because other things come with it. Another, what I think is a brilliant strategy in the Belton Road project, as I said, they're bringing in all these nuclear power plants, and they're fairly quickly obsoleting their coal plants. So they've got all this coal. What do they do with it? Well, they're building 300 coal-fired power plants in developing countries on the Belton Road project. So they're moving all that down to other countries in Africa and other places. And now they'll support those power companies for 10 or 15 years. And then guess what? They're going to sell them the best nuclear plants in the world. So over the next 10 to 20 years, they're going to dominate the world electrical generation industry. And it's just so clear of what they're doing. And yet we don't have any unified response to it.
Well, not only don't we have a unified response to it, we have the unawareness that you just glossed over, in that most Americans still think that our country leads in everything.
Mhm.
But when you look at whatever you want to gauge, you find out that the United States is far from the top in most of these things. And when you combine that with their ability to integrate everything and make it work like a machine, compared to our inability to do that, and the ongoing constant political disagreements that are going on, we don't really have a chance, quite frankly. That's my opinion on that, and I'm Richard Herzog.
Well, it's hard to be optimistic, that's for sure. But I'm hoping that there's a saying, never waste a crisis. And we're certainly in a crisis right now. It's going to cause us to fundamentally change the way we think and do things. And if we can take this moment to recalibrate ourselves and our values, I think we could be just, and it's not like one's going to win or not. China's main focus is that they never get pushed around again. If you look at, this is another number that boggles my mind. The United States has 6,000 nuclear warheads. Russia has 6,000 nuclear warheads. China has less than 300. Russia's economy is smaller than Canada's. So yet we look at Russia as a superpower, but the only thing they're a superpower in is nuclear warheads.
Mhm.
China's going to be a superpower in the economy.
Mhm.
And they're not building a bunch of new nuclear warheads. They just want enough that if anybody messes with them, they can ruin your day. And you don't hear anything like, as opposed to the Soviet Union that was out to dominate the world. China's out to acquire the raw materials from the world, but they could care less about what kind of a government you have, whether you're a dictator or a democracy or whatever. They don't care. And they're not espousing, their communism is Chinese communism. And they make a very big point of that. It's not going to go anywhere else because they are special people and that's what they believe.